Well, it was an unusually slow week in the House for this late in the session, but that was, as we assumed, just the calm before the storm. So we're bracing ourselves for an intense last 2 weeks in the House. One thing that we're extremely excited about is that as of today, Missouri workers are entitled to earned sick leave through their jobs, just as voters intended when they went to the ballot box in November. Now that workers have this right, Democrats will fight like hell over the next couple of weeks to make sure they get to keep it. With nearly 50% of Missouri voters approving Proposition A, that should have been the end of it. But after losing at the ballot box, again and again, and at the Supreme Court, the anti-worker forces in the state just won't let it go. To snatch away the legal right to earn sick leave at this point would be an extreme act of cruelty, not to mention pure disdain towards voters. While next week the focus will be on finishing fiscal year 26 budget before the constitutional deadline, the big fights to protect both earned sick leave and the voter ratified constitutional right to reproductive freedom awaits us during the session's final days. Before I take questions, I do want to highlight that we had an incredibly powerful hearing here in the House this week. Representative Marty Jo Murray had presented his bill to designate the last week in April Infertility Awareness Week. And I'd love to give him a chance to talk through what that hearing was like and why this is such a passion for him.
Thank you. Thank you all. And as the minority leader was saying, my name is Marty Jo Murray. I represent the 78th District in the city of St. Louis. And this past Tuesday, we had a hearing in Children and Families in regards to some legislation that I filed earlier this year, House Concurrent Resolution 4, which, as she was saying, would designate the last week in April as being Infertility Awareness Week. So we currently have that at the national level. There are several states throughout the country that have it. But what the concurrent resolution was seeking to do was be able to allow the state of Missouri to recognize that as one, being very important, that is needed. And when we look at the fights that we have in this chamber all the time, it's oftentimes it's nice to have some bipartisan efforts that, that both sides can agree on. And with HCR 4, we have over, I think the last time I checked today was about 36 sponsors or so, pushing towards 40. So over 20% of the people in our chamber in this space co-sponsor the legislation. In the hearing, very emotional. No one warned me that when you go to Children and Families, you should bring tissues because it can get emotional. And a lot of people were sharing their stories, opening up about it. And it was just nice to see everyone want to get on the same accord in terms of the need for family building, the need for awareness around what the causes of infertility and what the state could potentially be doing in the future to solve it. So with that, I'll answer any questions if you all have any.
Why is that a vote of the people? You said HDR?
HCR, House Concurrent Resolution.
HCR, okay.
Yeah. And then one thing I do want to mention, we had the hearing in the morning, and then that afternoon, I was able to seize an opportunity to put that on Senate Bill 7 as an amendment to try to get that to the governor's desk a little bit sooner. So fingers crossed. Yeah, we can get that done. So.
Is infertility a bigger problem now than it was in the past, and why do you think that is?
It's absolutely a growing issue. When we look at the environment, causes in the environment, the dietary or the things that are in people's diets that are causing people to be more infertile, I think that's why we see such a push at the national level, conversations starting to happen on both sides of the aisle through chambers all throughout this country because it is a growing issue. So the hope is that, future state, this passes, and we are able to have more advocacy days. We have advocates come down telling their stories, more professionals in the more people in the medical profession coming down to give their expertise so we can try to solve the issue.
What methods are you, so an awareness week is great to let everybody know, but what is the next step?
Yeah.
Now that everybody knows, how can you actually fix that problem?
Well, I'm not a doctor myself. I know I can only speak to what me and my wife went through in our journey. But I think, like you said, the first step is awareness and just starting to have those conversations, having physicians, people that fertility clinics coming down to the Capitol to talk to legislators, to begin those conversations. And hopefully more legislators starting to sponsor legislation around how to solve it. But I think the first part in solving the issue is acknowledging that it exists. So.
What, can you talk about your journey a little bit? I didn't listen.
Okay. Yeah. Years in the making. As I was saying during my testimony, you plan things out, right? You say, okay, I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna go get a degree, I'm gonna, get married, and we'll have our first child a year after we're married, and we came to find out that that's not how life works, and that we had some challenges, and it was like years in the making. And the one thing that was most shocking to me is the isolation, because no one talks about it. When you talk about 1 in 6, there were people that rushed down to the committee room just to be able to say, hey, I have a story too. People that I never even knew that they were silently struggling with it. So I think the hardest challenge of that was just not really having people I can talk to that have been through it, because I didn't know if they've been through it or not. And just, the ups and downs, where you have some success, suffering miscarriages, and not really necessarily wanting to take that back to your family, because everybody's so excited when you say we're pregnant. But then when you say we lost a child, those phone calls and text messages kind of fade away a bit. Yeah, it was a little. You want to get the waterworks going today? I'm trying to get home. But no. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Happy to take questions.
What did you think of Marlene Terry being appointed to the conference committee that will decide the $50 million for the U.S. Scholars Program?
Well, I think our budget ranking member has some thoughts on that, so I'd love to hand it over to her.
Yeah, so it was a surprise to me today that the speaker did not, I guess I should say a surprise to me yesterday, that the speaker's office communicated that he did not plan to accept the recommendations from the minority leader. Of course, that's not a violation of any rule, but kind of in practice in my time in the House, typically, especially when it comes to the budget committee, our recommendations are taken because we understand that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of hours that go into crafting a budget, and there are only a handful of people that sit in that room and are aware of each line item of the budget. Representative Terry was not one of those members. She doesn't serve on budget, so to me, I think that is an anomaly and a flag, and I can't speak to the speaker's motivations of why he made that decision, but I can tell you every single time I've been on this microphone, I've talked about a handful of things, and making sure we don't privatize public education in this state has been one of my priorities, and I'm hopeful that when we get through this process of Budget Conference Committee that I can come up here and smile and tell you that we were able to accomplish that goal.
So what was your recommendation for the conference committee?
Absolutely. So my recommendation was myself, and then the subcommittee chair on each subcommittee would go with me, or each subcommittee ranking.
Is it your recommendation, or is it the minority leader's recommendation?
I make recommendations to the minority leader, yeah.
So he rejected the minority leader's recommendation
That is correct, at the direction of the appropriations chair,
for House Bill 12?
for all House bills.
Oh, for all House bills?
Correct.
Oh, wow. So what do you think about that?
Well, one of the things you've heard from ranking member Betsy Fogel over the last several months is how well the budget process has been working, how much bipartisanship and respect went into crafting the budget in the House this year. So to come down to the very end of this process and feel disrespected at the end is a huge disappointment to me. I think it's a huge disappointment to our budget team. And to say that I am a little frustrated by it would be probably an understatement. That said, I know what it's like to be in the super minority here. Nothing has changed, and the super majority gets what they want when they want it.
So the budget, what the Senate's version looks like, are there certain things that you are going to fight against or for based upon the changes that were made over in the Senate?
Absolutely. Of course, we worked as a minority party over in the House very diligently to get projects and investments in for our communities back home, and a lot of those were honored by the appropriations chair in the Senate, and some were not. So when it comes to supporting specific line items, of course, we'll support the ones that we worked hard on over in the House. I would say as a general rule, typically we are supportive of the Senate's investments. Usually the budget comes out of the governor's office, comes to the House, they choose to strip money, it goes over to the Senate, they choose to make more investments. So kind of globally, I think, and especially in a lot of those big picture items, my advice to myself and whoever is sitting in that room with me as my second would be to support the correct investments in our state, which usually means siding with the Senate, and we'll see. Yeah.
So in the budget, in the House version, 105 earmarks in the
Investments, Rudy, investments.
5 earmarks in the 13.
You and I are going to go round and round on this.
The Senate put 169 in. If you add them all up, and they all make the budget, it's about $600 million of general revenue. Is it reasonable to expect that all of those will make it?
No, I don't think that's reasonable. I think, historically, again, the chairman in both the House and the Senate get together and pre-negotiate a lot of these things. I do not know what extent that will happen this year, or if that will happen at all. I wouldn't anticipate that all investments for our local nonprofits and for communities back home will see themselves across the finish line. But we as Democrats will be at the table to try to make sure that we're making the fiscally responsible investments in our nonprofits and our communities back home, whether it be an infrastructure investment or an investment with a nonprofit whose goal is to provide pathways out of poverty for families. Democrats will continue to lead the charge on those.
Do Democrats have any particular interest in reversing the cuts to the Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State's office?
I think if you campaign on cutting government and not growing government, and then you come into this building as a statewide official and your first official act is to ask for more money, I think it is fair of Senator Huff to question that.
So regarding the Capitol Commission, is that something that the Democrats and stuff have been certain items pushed for specifically with ADA compliance and stuff?
I couldn't speak to that. I know we have a member that is very passionate about that. I don't see her up here today, so I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Sounds like the paid sick leave law is going to be a priority over the next couple of weeks, at least on the Republican side. So do you think there's any sort of happy medium there? Because that's been discussed over on the Senate side. Is they think there could be, it sounds like they were close to a compromise previously, so just curious.
Yeah, it sounds like the Senate Dems were negotiating to try to carve out small businesses and provide a little bit of relief to those small business owners. But it also sounds like those negotiations fell apart. And I really can't speak to where they're at or what's coming next with this piece of legislation. I will say that there is currently no real appetite, I would say, in our caucus to make any kind of concession around this issue. It went into effect today, and to claw it back from workers at this point feels cruel.
Usually there's pushback both from your side of the aisle and in Kansas City whenever Jeff City or voters across the state want to tell Kansas City what to do. Why, in your mind, is HR 23 different than that? Why was it so unanimous in the Capitol?
Well, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was unanimous. I would say there were some folks who didn't agree with all of it. I think that when we're talking about an official who is making such wide rules and there's such large implications for their position on the general public, I think it's fair to reassess whether or not that person should be elected. And I think that the conversation in the House around the issue has illuminated that fact for a lot of folks, whether or not we're in the area or not, that this assessor position should be elected.
I have a question for the St. Louis County and St. Louis reps. What do you think of Ian Mackey's HJR to merge the city and the county? You can go one by one.
Anyone like to weigh in?
So the question is, how do we feel about it?
Do you support it, or do you have a thought?
Personally, I don't support it, but what I will say is that there is sentiment in the region around efficiency, right? So, whether that be through utilities, police departments, whatever that looks like, I think the general public just may be open to the conversation. But when you look at conversations around governing structures, I think people will have strong opinions about it. So, one thing that I kind of sat in on a hearing a little bit in that regard, and I will say that hearing the chair say, Chair Chris say that he isn't in favor of that being a statewide vote, that's encouraging, because I think at the end of the day, St. Louisans and St. Louis County constituents should be the ones that have that decision at the end of the day.
Okay, anyone from the county?
So I'll just briefly say, yeah, I think that it's an issue that the people in St. Louis City and St. Louis County should be deciding the details of. I know there are groups that are working on various proposals that have different levels of integration. I think that it's a situation where the region's going to succeed or fail, as a region economically, and look forward to seeing the outcome of those groups that are looking into what we can do to be a little more efficient in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, but I think that that's a decision for the St. Louis City and St. Louis County voters.
Back to Prop A a little bit. The speaker a few minutes ago said there's no need to pass legislation encouraging conversion of downtown St. Louis buildings because Proposition A is in place, and so incentives for businesses that might be on the ground floors are unneeded because businesses won't want to open because of Prop A. What do you see as the true economic impact? Are businesses going to shut their doors all over the state in the next month?
I think that is an absurd way to look at Proposition A. I think that the idea that providing workers with more protections is a business killer is, well, it's wild, first of all. I mean, when you look at the folks who, workers aren't just workers. We are also consumers, right? And so when we look at the bigger picture of what Proposition A does for our communities, I'm a big believer that a rising tide lifts all boats. When Missouri workers across the state are successful, businesses across the state will be successful. They will have more money in their pockets. They will have more time to spend with their family, which means more recreation time. There is so much that will come of workers feeling more supported by their employers, that I think to try to make this seem like this is something that will kill business, that will keep businesses from opening, I think it's absurd, and I think it's quite disappointing, and I think it sends absolutely the wrong message to workers.
Proposition A will not cause Missouri to become a vast hellscape?
I don't think it will, Rudy. I don't think it will, no.
Will it, do you anticipate that it could maybe reduce the number of jobs, let's say? If there are employers that cannot afford, some of the requirements in the law, are they going to hire 10 people instead of 20, for instance? Do you think that argument is wild, absurd?
I don't think that is such a crazy argument. What I would say is that if a business has to make a decision about what they can and can't afford, that is a business decision that all business owners make constantly. As a former business owner myself, I know that you're always looking at the bottom line. You're always trying to figure out what can you do, what can you offer your clients, what can you offer your employers, and if there are cuts that have to be made in response to policy, I suppose I could see that happening. I would also argue that business owners have been prepared for this since November, and my guess is that they have all been, most of them at least, have been working towards making sure that they can continue to operate as best they can under the new proposition.
Earlier that the Senate was trying to add some carve-outs for relief for small businesses specifically. That implies that there is a burden that this will place on small businesses.
I think that the negotiation does not always, the fact that there is a negotiation going on or was a negotiation going on doesn't necessarily imply that there are concessions around that issue. They don't have to agree on the premise to be forced to the negotiating table, right? So, I think that it was potentially more of a situation, and I can't speak exactly to the Senate negotiations, but I think it was potentially more of a, okay, well, let's see what we can come to here. But I don't necessarily agree that it is incredibly burdensome on small businesses. I again think that businesses of all sizes have the ability to strategically plan, look ahead, and create a business that works under the current circumstances.
Obviously, there's been a lot of conversations in the next few weeks about the proposed abortion ban that's being debated in the Senate. I did want to ask you about SB 22. Kehoe signed that, and Andrew Bailey immediately appealed the Jackson County ruling. Is that, in your mind, an overreach by the legislature? And do you view it like targeting judges that they disagree with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard my Republican colleagues use the term activist judges. They constantly accuse the courts of overstepping. So does it surprise me that the legislature has come in and done that to the courts? No, not at all. Also doesn't surprise me that Chuck Hatfield immediately filed a lawsuit against it in Cole County because it is, as far as we can tell, unconstitutional. SB 22 was. I don't think that it should be a surprise to anybody that it's being immediately challenged, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of that.
What kind of environment does that create with voters approving Amendment 3, and then there's all this confusing news about where access stands? Like, I guess that's my question.
It is very confusing. I mean, voters right now, all they're hearing is that the Republican-led legislature in Missouri is trying to take away the rights that they enshrined in our Constitution in November. And, I got an email from a constituent the other day who was really confused about what was going on and explicitly said, I voted against Amendment 3. And yet, I am so disappointed that lawmakers aren't respecting the will of voters. This is what is in the Constitution now. This is what the law of the land should be. And so when you've got voters who are on the other side of this issue, who are as frustrated with the fact that the legislature is trying to overturn the will of the voters as the folks who voted for it, I think that that is a clear indication that voters across the board have no appetite for lawmakers in this building telling them what they do and do not want.
I'd like to ask about this age verification bill to use porn sites that Representative Gallick has. It's been sitting forever, hasn't been voted on or third read in the House. Do you happen to know what's going on and why that just continues to sit? My understanding from the House Speaker is people have concerns about the database storage, and I'm just curious how you reconcile database storage with child safety.
I think that there are a lot of concerns with this piece of legislation on both sides of the aisle. The database is certainly a piece of it. When you look at how often we see websites and companies being hacked and the potential for that data to be leaked, for instance. I think that that's a big concern, especially when we're talking about adult websites. And so that's a big concern. I also think that it is potentially, it's one of those situations where the law is still not, even this law that's being proposed has not caught up to where technology is now. Because what we've heard over and over again from folks testifying on this bill is that it is super easy to get around this verification process. All you have to do is turn on a VPN, for instance. And how many of us have a VPN already? How many of our households have that right now? It's too easy to get around. There are database concerns both on the left and the far right, and I think that it's a flawed bill, and I think that that's the biggest holdup. All right, y'all have a great weekend.